Hey guys, tonight we're going deep. Not just scrolling through your ex's profile at 2 a.m. deep, but soul deep. We're diving into something that probably shaped you more than your first love, more than your high school trauma, maybe even more than that one season of your favorite comfort show. We're talking about the first emotional blueprint you ever knew. Your mother. Yep. I said it. Not your mom, the person, but the idea of her, the energy, the presence, or maybe the absence. And listen, this might get a little uncomfortable, like wearing wet socks on carpet, uncomfortable. But you'll be okay. Actually, better than okay. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And comment below. Where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Midnight in Miami? 3 a.m. in Seattle? I want to know who else is here with me in the quiet. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take a step, not into a room, but into a feeling, a memory you don't remember. There's no image, no words, just warmth, like bath water that's exactly the right temperature. You can almost hear a heartbeat. It isn't yours. And in that moment, back when you were floating in someone else's body, everything you felt was hers. According to Carl Jung, this is where your story starts, not with your first word or your first day of school, but with the psychological imprint of your mother. The original presence. The first other. You weren't born with language. You were born with sensation. So when she was anxious, your cells tightened. When she was calm, your tiny world softened. You learned how to feel before you learned how to think. And those early feelings, you carried them into adulthood, not in your mind, but in your wiring. In the way your stomach clenches when someone raises their voice, or the way you apologize when you didn't even do anything wrong. Back in 1952, pediatrician and psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott coined the term, the good enough mother. Not perfect, not flawless, just present enough, attuned enough, consistent, enough for a baby to develop a sense of self. But when that consistency isn't there, when the love is unpredictable, conditional, or invisible, you don't grow around it. You form around it, like a tree growing around a nail. And here's the weird part. Even if your mom did love you, that doesn't mean you felt it, because babies don't understand intentions. They don't read your tone, they feel your vibe. A distracted hug, a forced smile, a tired silence. Those moments don't get filed away as mom was stressed today. They get recorded as something's wrong with me. Little by little, that becomes your internal voice. Experts still debate whether these wounds can be completely healed or just better understood and integrated. But what we do know is, if you never look at this, it looks for you. In your relationships, in your self-worth, in the way you chase validation and call it ambition. Think about fairy tales. The evil stepmother, the cold queen, the dark feminine. It's not because mothers are villains, it's because our greatest fear is losing our emotional anchor. When the mother figure becomes unsafe or unpredictable, it threatens the foundation of who we think we are. And you've probably felt that ripple in adulthood. You ever want someone to just know how you feel without you saying a word? Like you're silently begging them to read your mind. That's the baby in you, hoping someone will attune to you like a mother once did, or didn't. That pattern didn't start last year with your situationship. It started before you were born. So no, this isn't about blaming your mom. You didn't choose her. And honestly, she probably didn't get what she needed either. Hurt people raise hurt people even with the best of intentions, but now you get to ask a new question, not to her, but to yourself. If I've been living as an emotional echo of my mother, who am I when I stop repeating her? That's the first crack in the mirror. And maybe, just maybe, the first opening for light to get in. And if you're sitting there feeling a little bit weird, maybe even a little sad, that's okay. You're waking up to something ancient, something tender, and something ready to be healed. Don't rush it. You don't need to fix everything tonight, you just need to stay with me. Because next, we're stepping into the space between words, the things your mother never said out loud, but you still heard loud and clear. You're standing in a quiet room now, no one's talking, but somehow you hear everything. The tension in the air, the way someone sighs before answering, the weight of unspoken things. That's the kind of silence you grew up in. Not peaceful, loaded. And maybe, just maybe, that's where your real story began. Because it wasn't always what your mother said that shaped you. It was what she didn't. You might remember words like, "I love you," or "be careful," or "clean your room," but those weren't the loudest messages. The loudest ones were silent. Her face when you cried too much. The way she stiffened when you needed something. Her smile when you acted right. That's where your emotional rules came from. Carl Jung talked about the shadow, the unconscious part of us we hide even from ourselves. And here's the twist. For many people, the shadow was born in childhood. Not from abuse or violence, but from absence. Emotional absence. A parent who was physically there, but emotionally checked out. Strange. Fact: studies have shown that emotional neglect, no yelling, no drama, just cold distance, can cause the same level of stress in a child's brain as outright trauma. You didn't need chaos. Silence was loud enough, and yet no one else saw it. In the 1980s, researchers coined the phrase, the invisible child. Not literally unseen, but overlooked, emotionally. That kid who never made a fuss, who made herself small, who read the room before she knew how to read a book. You might have been that kid, or still are. And it messes with your head because, on paper, your mom may have seemed good. She made your lunches, went to your recitals, didn't hit you. And that's what makes the wound so confusing. How do you explain a pain no one else can see? Experts still debate whether children can accurately interpret adult emotional states, but they agree on this. Kids sense misalignment. If your mom said, "I'm fine," but her energy said, "I'm falling apart," you picked up on that. And instead of questioning her, you questioned yourself. Am I too needy? Did I do something wrong? Why do I feel so heavy when nothing's happening? You learn to decode her moods, read the air, avoid topics. Become what she needed, even if it meant shrinking what you needed. And here's where it gets sneaky. That hyper-attunement, people praise it now. You're so intuitive. You always know how to make people comfortable. But guess what? That's not a personality trait. That's a survival skill. You learn to regulate her emotions before you ever learn to manage your own. It's like being born with a tiny satellite dish, constantly scanning the environment, picking up subtle shifts in tone, body language, even silence. And as you grew older, that part of you didn't go away. You carried it into relationships, friendships, even jobs. Always anticipating, always adjusting, always asking yourself, what do they need from me? But here's the heartbreaking part. When you're always tuned into others, you never get to tune into yourself. Imagine being in a relationship now and someone says, "What do you want?" And your brain freezes. You feel blank, empty, because for so long what you wanted wasn't the priority. Keeping the peace was. It's exhausting, but so familiar it feels like home. You probably had moments where you wished your mom would just see you. Not the version of you that made her proud or behaved right, but the messy, confused, too much to handle version. The one you had to hide because you sensed early on that she couldn't handle it, and no one told you. That wasn't your job. There's a story from ancient mythology, Demeter and Persephone. Persephone, the daughter, is taken into the underworld, and Demeter, the mother, is devastated. But here's the overlooked part. Demeter loses herself in her daughter's absence. She stops being. Everything in the world dies. It's a myth about enmeshment. The kind of mother who doesn't just love her child, but lives through them. Maybe your mother didn't vanish. But maybe every time you pulled away, even a little, she made it feel like the world would collapse. So you stayed close, too close, and lost pieces of yourself in the process. And if you're thinking, but she did her best, yes, that can be true. And you can still be hurting. You can hold both compassion and clarity. Because if no one ever said this to you before, let me say it now. It wasn't your job to be her peace. It wasn't your job to read her silence. It wasn't your job to make her okay. But it is your job now to unlearn what never should have been yours to carry. And no, that doesn't mean cutting her off, or writing a letter you'll never send. Though you could, those things can help. It means starting to name what was invisible, giving language to what was only ever felt, releasing yourself from the vow you didn't know you made, the vow to keep her from falling apart, even if it meant breaking yourself. So ask yourself tonight, what did I need to hear, but never did? What did I feel, but had to swallow? What did I lose while trying to be good? And just notice what comes up. Don't analyze it. Just feel it. Because next, we're stepping into the mirror. The fantasy. The lie we all wanted to believe. That our mothers were perfect. That they were everything we needed. That they were safe. We're going to talk about what happens when that illusion breaks, and what's left behind when it does. So there you are, standing in front of the mirror. But it's not really a mirror, it's a memory, dressed up like a fairy tale. One you've carried for years, maybe since forever. And in it, your mother is perfect. She glows. She knows. She gives. She never raises her voice, never withdraws her love, never misses a moment where you needed her. She's the soft place to land, the constant, the archetype. But then something happens. You grow up. You notice things. Her edges get sharper. Her silences grow longer. She forgets things. Birthdays, appointments, parts of you. She says things like, "You're too sensitive," or "Don't be so dramatic." And suddenly the warmth you believed in turns cold. That moment. That's the shattering of the ideal mother complex. Carl Jung warned us about this. He believed every psyche forms an inner image of the mother, part real, part fantasy. It starts as this glowing, divine figure, because in infancy, she is your world. She feeds you, holds you, keeps you alive. But the psyche has to evolve past this image, or else you get stuck, worshipping someone who was never meant to be a god. And when the illusion breaks, it hurts. Even if you know logically she's just human, emotionally, it feels like betrayal. Like realizing Santa isn't real, except Santa made your lunch and taught you to tie your shoes. You feel angry, confused, guilty for feeling angry. It's like breaking up with a version of her that never truly existed. A lot of people get stuck here, trying to keep the fantasy alive. She did her best. She had it worse than me. It wasn't that bad. And sure, those things might be true, but they're not the whole truth. You can't heal what you won't name, and sometimes the naming sounds like, "She wasn't emotionally available. She made me feel responsible for her feelings. She punished me with silence. She needed me to parent her. She loved me, but not in the way I needed." Here's a weird historical fact. In the Victorian era, mothers were advised not to kiss their children too often. Parenting guides literally warned that too much affection would weaken character. So if your great-grandmother seemed cold, and your grandmother followed suit, and your mother struggled to say, "I'm proud of you," well, maybe the wound didn't start with her. Maybe it's inherited. Experts still debate how much of this is generational trauma versus individual experience. But what's clear? Patterns repeat. Until someone decides to break them, and that someone, yeah, it's probably you. But breaking the cycle doesn't mean burning bridges. It doesn't mean villainizing your mother or writing her out of your life. It means letting the fantasy die so the truth can breathe. It means grieving the mother you wished you had, so you can see the one you actually had, with clear eyes, not rose-colored glasses. And that grief? Oh, it's real, it's heavy. It sneaks up on you when you watch old home videos, or when you see a mom and daughter laughing in a coffee shop and you feel nothing. Or worse, envy. No one talks about how complicated Mother's Day can be when you're waking up from the fantasy. You want to honor her, but you also want to be honest. And sometimes that honesty sounds like, "She did some things right, and she also hurt me." Both can be true. And just like that, you start to step out of the mirror. You begin to see the cracks not as evidence of failure, but as the first glimpse of reality. The reality where you get to define your own emotional landscape, where you're not waiting for her to finally change, finally get it, finally say what she never said. Here's the liberating truth. You don't need her to understand your pain in order for your pain to be valid. That's where your power starts. The moment you stop trying to make her into something she never was, and start becoming someone you were always meant to be. You'll still have moments where you slip back into the fantasy. That's okay. Healing isn't a straight line. It's more like a YouTube playlist. Sometimes you end up watching the same emotional lesson 15 times before it really clicks. And yes, there will be a part of you that wonders, did I make this up? Was it really that bad? You didn't. And yes, it was. Because emotional pain doesn't need bruises to be real. You don't need to justify your hurt with horror stories. Sometimes it's not the slap. It's the sigh. The look. The way she looked right through you like you weren't even there. You were there. You still are. And you're finally starting to see yourself. Not through her eyes, but through your own. That's the beginning of everything. So tonight, maybe just sit with that the woman you needed doesn't have to exist in order for you to become who you're meant to be. You don't need a perfect past to create a peaceful future. And next, we're talking about the flip side of the fantasy. What happens when you become the caretaker, the emotional sponge, the unofficial therapist, when your mother's wounds become your job to manage. Because if you ever felt more like her parent than her child, this next part is for you. You're 12 years old, maybe younger. You just got home from school and you can already feel it, the heaviness in the air, the silence again. Maybe the kitchen's a mess. Maybe she's still in bed. Or maybe she's at the table staring blankly at nothing. You drop your backpack, and without even realizing it, you shift. You smile brighter, talk softer, offer to help with dinner. You ask how her day was, knowing she won't really ask about yours, and slowly, subtly, you become her support system. Not because she asked, because she needed it. That's the moment it started. And here's what no one told you. If you had to emotionally care for your mother, you were never allowed to just be a kid. Carl Jung called this kind of inversion parentification, a role reversal where the child becomes the emotional caretaker of the parent. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it looks like being the good kid, the calm one, the one who never caused problems. Sometimes it's taking on her moods, her fears, her pain, before you even understand your own. You grew up too fast, but not in the cool movie montage kind of way. In the quietly suffocating way. Strange fact. Psychologists found that kids who experience emotional parentification often score higher in empathy and responsibility, but also in anxiety, depression, and emotional confusion. It's like having an upgraded heart, but no manual for how to carry it. And let's be honest, people love you for it. Your friends say you're a great listener. Your co-workers admire your calm in chaos. You're the one who remembers birthdays, who senses when something's off, who holds everyone else together. You're the emotional glue. But behind the scenes, you're tired. So tired. Because being the strong one is only cute until it becomes a cage. You might not even realize how often you do it. You talk someone down from panic. Offer a solution, mirror their mood so they feel seen. You keep your own feelings neatly folded in the drawer, marked "Deal with later." Spoiler, later never comes. And the worst part? When you finally break down, no one knows what to do with you. They're so used to leaning on you that when you need support, they either freeze or flee. You're not allowed to be messy, or loud, or needy. And that hurts in a way that's hard to explain. Experts still argue whether emotional parentification is a form of trauma. But here's what they agree on. It interrupts development. When your energy goes to managing someone else's emotional world, there's no room left to explore your own. You weren't nurtured. You were the nurturer. That's not love. That's emotional labor. And you didn't sign up for it. Maybe your mom would call you mature for your age. Maybe she confided in you about her relationship problems. Maybe she leaned on you like a best friend instead of setting boundaries. Or maybe it was subtler. Her sadness hanging in the air like perfume, and you doing whatever it took to lift her back up. You became her therapist, her cheerleader, her emotional anchor. And in doing that, you learned one dangerous thing. Your value comes from being useful. So now, even as an adult, you feel guilty resting, guilty asking for help, guilty setting a boundary. Because some part of you still believes that unless you're taking care of someone, you don't deserve care yourself. That's not your fault. That's the result of emotional inversion. When a parent uses a child to meet their needs, it's not always intentional. Sometimes it's generational, but it's always a burden you weren't meant to carry. There's this one bizarre story from medieval France. Young children in monasteries were sometimes put in charge of caring for adults with ailments. Literal 6-year-olds helping bathe the elderly. Sounds absurd, right? But emotionally, that's what a lot of us lived. You were a child asked to be an adult, and now you're an adult still stuck in that child's job. Here's where it gets tricky. Part of you might be afraid to let go of the role. Because if you stop fixing, who are you? If you stop soothing everyone, what happens? If your mom spirals again, will it be your fault? No. It won't. Repeat that. Her healing is not your job. Her happiness is not your responsibility. Her sadness is not your shame. Your only job now is this: reclaim your inner child. And yes, I know, inner child sounds like one of those overused Instagram therapy quotes. But hear me out. That part of you, the one who wanted to play, rest, laugh too loud, cry too hard, ask for things without apologizing, that part never died. She just went underground, waiting for permission. So tonight, give her some, even if it feels weird, even if it feels selfish, even if it feels scary. Try something small. Eat cereal for dinner. Wear mismatched socks. Color outside the lines. Let yourself be useless, and watch the world keep spinning. Because guess what? You don't have to be needed to be worthy. You don't have to be productive to be loved. And most of all, you don't have to parent your mother anymore. Next, we're going deeper. Into the anger you weren't allowed to feel. The kind that simmers under politeness. The kind that comes from being everyone's emotional band-aid. The kind that, if you don't face it, starts turning on you. Yeah, we're going there. You don't want to admit it, but you're angry. Not the kind of anger that explodes. Not fire. Not fists. Yours is quieter. Sharper. It lives in your stomach. Clenched like a fist you can't unclench. It shows up as sarcasm, eye rolls, fatigue that sleep can't fix. Sometimes it sneaks into your voice when someone asks you to do one more thing. You say, sure, but inside you're screaming, I'm not your caretaker. And maybe you learned early that anger was off limits. In your house, anger was either terrifying or invisible. If she got mad, things broke. If you got mad, you were punished or ignored, or guilt-tripped into apologizing for having feelings in the first place. So you adapted. You smiled. You swallowed the fury like it was medicine. And you told yourself things like, it's not a big deal. She didn't mean it. I'm just being Dramatic. Sound familiar? Carl Jung believed that emotions we suppress don't disappear. They go into the shadow. That's the part of your psyche that holds everything you've been taught is unacceptable. Anger, jealousy, grief. All the stuff you buried to be a good daughter, a good person. But the shadow doesn't stay buried forever. It leaks in the way you snap at a barista over oat milk, in the resentment you feel when your partner asks for help, in the way your body gets sick every time you go home for the holidays. That's the shadow knocking. Loudly. Anger isn't evil. It's not even the enemy. It's information. It tells you where your boundaries were crossed, where your needs went unmet, where love got replaced with obligation. Here's a weird historical tidbit. In ancient Greek medicine, it was believed that women's anger came from a wandering womb, an actual organ that would move around their bodies, causing hysteria. So if you were a woman feeling rage, they didn't ask why. They just treated it like a disease. And in some ways, we still do that. We pathologize anger instead of listening to it. But your anger? It's not random. It's the echo of every time you weren't allowed to say no. Every time you were told to forgive before you were ready. Every time you got scolded for raising your voice, but she got to yell unchecked. That anger is yours. You get to feel it. You get to rage, safely, intentionally, without apology. Maybe that looks like journaling until your pen rips through the page. Maybe it's scream singing in the car. Maybe it's boxing class. Maybe it's just whispering, "I'm mad, I'm so mad," and letting the tears come. Yes, anger cries. And no, you're not weak for feeling it. Here's the trap, though. Sometimes your anger turns inward. It morphs into self-loathing. You start saying things to yourself that echo her voice. You're too sensitive. You expect too much. You're the problem. Sound familiar? That's called internalized rage. When the world told you it wasn't safe to express your pain outward, you turned it into self-blame. You made yourself the villain in your own story just to keep the peace. But keeping the peace shouldn't cost you your truth. There's still debate among experts about how best to release suppressed anger. Some say talk therapy, others say body-based practices like somatic release. Some say writing letters you never send. The method? It's personal. What matters is that you stop pretending it's not there. Because the longer you deny it, the more it steals from you. Your joy, your softness, your ability to trust your instincts. Anger is the guard dog of your boundaries. If you train it, it protects you. If you ignore it, it bites you from the inside. So here's a quiet exercise. Tonight, before bed, put one hand on your chest, the other on your belly. Breathe. And then ask, what am I angry about that I've never said out loud? Don't edit. Don't justify. Just listen. You might be surprised at what answers. Maybe you're angry she never apologized, angry she played victim, angry she minimized your pain, angry that even now she makes you feel like you're the difficult one. That's okay. You don't have to say it to her face. You don't have to have a big confrontation or craft the perfect speech. You just have to stop lying to yourself about how much it hurt. Because when you honor your anger, you honor you, and when that happens, you begin to shift. You stop reacting from old wounds and start responding from new awareness. You stop fawning to avoid rejection. You start feeling more alive. A listener once wrote, "I thought healing would feel like peace. But it actually started with rage. Only after I let it out did I feel calm. Yeah, that tracks, because anger is the storm before the still, and in that stillness, something new begins, something deeper. In the next section, we're going to touch the wound itself, the feeling of being invisible, the ache that says, no one really saw me, not even her, and why that unmet need for visibility might be driving your relationships. Now, in ways you never imagined, you remember being in the room, but somehow it's like you weren't there. Maybe it was dinner time and everyone talked over you. Maybe you were dressed up for a school play and she forgot to look up from her phone. Or maybe, most painfully, she was physically present, but emotionally a million miles away. And so, somewhere along the line, this quiet belief rooted itself inside you. You are only real when someone else notices you. That's the ache of invisibility, and tonight, we're pulling it into the light. Carl Jung believed that the self is shaped through reflection, by being mirrored by others. Children don't just grow into themselves alone in a vacuum. They need someone to say, I see you. I hear you. You make sense. If your mother never did that, you didn't stop needing it. You just learned to chase it. And that's how you became a chameleon. You figured out what people wanted and gave it to them fast. You wore moods like outfits. You could shift your tone, your laugh, your energy. You learned how to disappear. In plain sight or shine just enough to avoid rejection. Let's pause here, because there's something eerie in history that mirrors this. In 19th century photography, there was a strange practice called hidden mother portraits. Infants would be photographed while the mother was literally cloaked, covered in a curtain or draped in fabric to hold the child still without appearing in the photo. The baby looks calm, but there's a ghost in the background. That's what your childhood felt like. There was someone there, but not really, and so you learned to perform connection. You didn't express your needs. You adapted. You didn't ask for affection. You earned it. You studied the emotional weather before speaking. You became hyper-aware of everyone else, but disconnected from yourself. That's why, even now, compliments make you uncomfortable, or why you panic when someone you love pulls away, even a little, or why you feel this burning urge to be impressive, helpful, or good all the time, because you're still trying to earn the attention you should have had just by existing. Here's a wild fact. Research on emotional neglect shows it often leaves deeper scars than physical abuse. Why? Because there's nothing to point to. No memory of being yelled at. No dramatic fights. Just silence. Absence. A blank space where love should have been. Experts still argue how to measure the long-term impact of being emotionally unseen. Some call it developmental trauma. Others classify it as an attachment injury. But the lived experience is universal. You walk through the world wondering if you even matter. That kind of invisibility isn't just sad, it's exhausting. Because it creates this constant performance loop. You're always trying to be enough, never knowing where the finish line is. But let me say this gently and clearly. You don't need to be spectacular to be worthy. You don't need to win someone's love like a game show prize. And you sure as hell don't need to keep playing the role of perfect daughter, hoping your mom will finally notice what she missed. Maybe she never looked at you with eyes that said, "You are so deeply known. That's not your fault. That's her wound, not yours to carry, not yours to fix." Here's something wild to try. Next time you feel invisible in a conversation, don't shrink. Pause. Breathe. Then say something small but true. "I don't feel seen right now." Or even simpler, "Can I have a turn?" You might feel like a spotlight is burning through your skin. That's okay. That's your nervous system learning that visibility isn't a threat anymore, and you deserve to be visible. Not for what you do, for who you are. That's the work now. Reconnecting with the parts of you that got muted. The kid who was loud, weird, sensitive, bold. The version of you that didn't yet know she had to dim her light to stay loved. Because that light, it's still there, buried under years of performance, waiting for you to stop auditioning. Tonight, you don't have to put on a show. You don't have to earn your way into the spotlight. Just whisper to yourself, "I'm here. I exist. I matter." Because you do. And when you start believing that, really believing, it changes everything. Your relationships, your voice, your posture, even the way you take up space in a room. Visibility becomes a right, not a reward. In the next section, we're stepping into the impact of that invisibility on your love life. Why you might chase unavailable people. Why validation feels like oxygen. Why your heart always goes to the emotionally distant. It's not random. It's muscle memory, and we're about to break it. You tell yourself you're just bad at love, that maybe you're too intense, too emotional, too much. But deep down, you suspect something else, something darker. You keep falling for people who feel familiar, not because they're good for you, but because they fit into the emotional blueprint you didn't even know you were carrying. See, when you grow up chasing scraps of love from someone emotionally distant, your nervous system starts to equate that chase with connection. It becomes your definition of normal, and that's why now you might feel bored with someone who's actually kind and available. You crave the distance, you chase the cold, and when you finally catch it, you start over-functioning. You try to earn love the same way you tried to earn your mother's warmth. Carl Jung warned us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Yeah, that quote stings, huh? You don't fall for emotionally unavailable people by accident. You're drawn to them like a moth to a porch light because your inner child still believes, if I can finally get someone distant to love me, it'll mean I was lovable all along. But let me say it plainly. Healing doesn't come from winning someone over. It comes from not needing to. Let's time travel for a second. In 1958, psychologist Harry Harlow conducted an infamous experiment with baby monkeys. He gave them two options: a cold wire mother that dispensed food, or a warm cloth mother that offered no nourishment but comfort. The monkeys overwhelmingly clung to the soft mother. Translation: we need emotional safety more than survival tools. Now imagine being raised by the wire version, technically cared for, but not held. You internalize the message that comfort is a luxury, that softness is weak, that you should be grateful for any attention at all, even if it's conditional. And that's why today, love feels like a puzzle you can't solve. You second-guess healthy relationships. You interpret calm as indifference. You think anxiety equals passion. You're not broken, you're just patterned. Experts still debate whether attachment wounds can ever be fully healed. But here's what most agree on. Awareness is the beginning of freedom. When you can spot the old wiring, you stop letting it drive. So what can you do when the pull is strong? When you feel yourself chasing someone who gives you just enough to keep hope alive, try this. Pause. Ask yourself, what am I really seeking here? 9 times out of 10, it's not even about that person. It's about trying to rewrite the original story. The one where you were a little kid hoping she would turn around and finally see you. Spoiler, you don't have to reenact that story anymore. You can write a new one. One where love is reciprocal, where attention doesn't feel like a prize, where you don't have to abandon yourself to stay connected. And yeah, that's going to feel weird at first. When someone texts back quickly, you'll doubt them. When someone compliments you, you'll scan for sarcasm. When someone offers consistency, your body might actually panic. That's just your trauma asking, is this safe? Or is this just unfamiliar? So here's a gentle reframe. Being bored isn't always a red flag. It might be a nervous system adjusting to peace. Let the discomfort of safety be your new teacher. Here's a little truth bomb, wrapped in kindness. You are not hard to love. You just learned love as labor. And now you're unlearning that lie. You don't have to earn someone's affection by becoming less of yourself. You don't have to chase their attention to feel worthy. The people who are right for you will not make you beg. They will not keep you guessing. They will not trigger your wounds for sport. They will see you fully and choose you without conditions. But before they can do that, you have to see yourself. You have to stop trying to become enough for people who were never capable of receiving you. Let that version of you rest. Let her be done. Because the love you crave, it starts with reparenting that invisible child inside. The one who just wanted to be held, noticed, accepted, without needing to perform. So tonight you don't have to chase anyone. You just have to notice the pattern, say its name, and choose just once not to repeat it. Next, we're peeling back a deeper layer. The shame. The belief that if your own mother couldn't love you properly, maybe something's wrong with you. That shame is sticky. It's silent. But it doesn't belong to you. Shame is the whisper that shows up after the storm. It's not loud like anger, not sharp like grief. It's quieter, like a weight you carry without realizing it's there until you try to rest and your body just won't let you. And shame has a particular flavor when it's mother-wound deep. It sounds like, if even my own mom couldn't love me right, what does that say about me? You don't say it out loud, of course. You're too polished for that. But it lingers in your choices, in who you date, in how you apologize before asking for anything, in how you flinch at compliments, in how you shrink when someone offers praise. Carl Jung described shame as a soul-eating emotion, not just because it hurts, but because it isolates. When you're ashamed, you don't reach out, you retreat. You build a fortress out of silence and perfectionism, and you call it independence. But deep down, you ache for connection. You want someone to tell you, you were never the problem. So let me be that voice tonight. You were never the problem. You were a child trying to understand love through the behavior of someone who didn't have the tools. Maybe she was wounded too. Maybe she learned to use shame as discipline. Maybe no one ever showed her what safety looked like. That context might explain her behavior, but it doesn't excuse your pain. Let's go back to 1692, Salem, Massachusetts, the height of the witch trials. One common pattern. Women who didn't conform, who spoke too boldly, didn't marry, or simply had too much presence, were accused of witchcraft. Why? Because shame is a powerful way to control women. Fast forward, and not much has changed. Instead of calling you a witch, they call you dramatic, too sensitive, attention-seeking, and when that shame comes from your own mother, it sinks into your DNA. It becomes the lens through which you see yourself. That's how the inner critic is born. You internalize her voice and call it your thoughts. You catch your reflection and instantly spot the flaw. You replay your day and cringe over nothing. You lie awake wondering why you can't just get it together. But listen carefully. That voice isn't you. It's a program installed without your permission. And here's something strange but true. Experts still can't fully agree on whether shame is learned socially or biologically ingrained. What's clear is that it thrives in secrecy. It festers in silence. That's why speaking your shame, naming it out loud, is rebellion. So try this tonight. Just you and your journal. Write a sentence that starts with, "I still feel ashamed that." Let the words come. Don't censor. Don't fix. Just bleed truth onto paper. You might write, "I still feel ashamed that I wanted her attention so badly. I still feel ashamed that I believed I was unlovable. I still feel ashamed that I keep hoping she'll change." And when you're done, read it back. Not to judge yourself, but to witness it. Because every time you bring shame into the light, it loses power. Healing from shame isn't about shouting affirmations in the mirror. It's about gentle contradiction. It's about noticing that you are lovable even when you mess up. That people do stay even when you cry. That you can speak and still be safe. Bit by bit, those experiences rewrite the old story. The one that said, you had to be perfect to be loved. You don't. You were worthy even when you were needy. Even when you made mistakes, even when you believed you were too much or not enough or something in between. You were never hard to love. You just learned love from someone who couldn't see your softness without trying to reshape it. And if shame taught you to hide, healing will teach you to reveal. Here's a trick. Next time you feel that shame flush rising in your cheeks, that desire to disappear, pause. Place one hand over your heart. Say, either in your head or out loud, "This feeling is old, but I am here now, and I'm allowed to stay." Let your body feel it. Let yourself be safe inside yourself. Because this work isn't just about confronting her, it's about returning to you. The parts you exiled, the parts you apologized for, the parts you thought were unworthy. You bring them home, and home, this time, is you. In the next section, we're facing one of the hardest questions of all. What happens when you finally stop waiting for her to become the mother you needed? It's scary, but also, it's the beginning of everything. There's a moment that comes, often quietly, often late at night, when you realize she's not going to change. She's not going to wake up one day with softer eyes and say, "I'm sorry, I didn't know. You didn't deserve that." She's not going to become the mother you needed, no matter how patient you are, no matter how many books you send, no matter how good you try to be. And in that moment, something breaks. Not just your heart, your hope. But strangely, that's also when healing finally starts. Because for years, you've been stuck in a loop, hoping, waiting, testing the waters, sending the subtle message, trying to explain yourself better. Hoping this time she'll hear you. Hoping this time she'll see you. Carl Jung called this the mother complex, a psychological knot where the unresolved hunger for maternal approval keeps you emotionally tethered long after it's safe to let go. And oh, it's exhausting. Because every phone call, every visit, every passive-aggressive comment feels like another audition. One more chance to earn what should have been freely given. But you don't need another performance. You need closure. Not from her, from you. Let's rewind to a bit of history. In ancient Greek myth, there's the tale of Demeter and Persephone. A mother so attached, she scoured the earth when her daughter was taken to the underworld. Seasons were born from her grief. But here's the twist nobody talks about. Eventually, Persephone adapts. She becomes queen of the underworld. She stops being only her mother's daughter and becomes her own force. That's what you're being asked to do now. Step out of her shadow and name your own life. And yes, that comes with grief. Not just grief for what she did, but grief for what she couldn't do. For the lullabies never sung, the hugs never offered, the safety you had to imagine for yourself. That grief is real. And here's the wild part. Psychologists still argue over the term for it. Some call it ambiguous loss. Others call it disenfranchised grief. Because society rarely validates the pain of a parent who's still alive, but emotionally unavailable. But your pain is valid. Whether she's still calling you on holidays, or hasn't spoken to you in years, whether she did her best, or you're still unpacking the damage. Because healing isn't about assigning blame, it's about reclaiming choice. You get to decide how close you stay. You get to define the terms of contact. You get to set the boundary, not to punish her, but to protect the little version of you still hoping to be saved. And if you're feeling guilty for even thinking about stepping back, that's the conditioning talking. You were raised to believe your worth was in your usefulness, that your job was to keep the peace. That family meant unconditional loyalty, even if it cost you your sanity. But here's a radical truth. Distance can be love too. Love for yourself. Because when the relationship is toxic or just consistently painful, you don't owe it endless access to your soul. You're allowed to say, "This hurts me, and I'm not doing it anymore." That doesn't make you cruel. It makes you conscious. Here's a practice. Instead of waiting for her to change, try writing a letter. Not to send, just to release. Start with, "I wanted you to be the one who held me, but instead you taught me how to hold myself. I wanted to matter without having to prove it. And even though you didn't change, I am." Let the words come as they do. You don't need permission to grieve. You don't need consensus from siblings or relatives. You just need space to tell the truth, to let it ache, to let it end. Because in that ending, there is space for you. Not the version of you she tolerated, not the version she shaped, but the real, actual you, unperformed, unashamed, unattached to her approval. And I won't lie, this part of the journey is heavy. The silence after the letting go can feel unbearable, but it's also sacred. It's the silence where you begin to hear your own voice again. In the next section, we'll explore what happens when you start to feel nothing at all. That numbness that creeps in when your emotions have been too loud for too long. Why it's not apathy, but protection. And why it might be your body's way of saying, I'm finally safe enough to rest. You know that feeling? Where you just don't feel anything, like you're watching your life happen from behind glass. People laugh, cry, get excited, and you smile, nod, do all the right things, but inside there's just static, numbness, and you wonder, what's wrong with me? Let me say this with so much softness. Nothing is wrong with you. Numbness isn't the absence of feeling. It's the overload. It's your nervous system saying, hey, I've been holding too much for too long, I need a second. When a child grows up in emotional chaos, whether it's neglect, criticism, cold silence, or random eruptions of anger, feeling becomes dangerous. So your body, brilliantly and tragically, builds a defense. It says, let's just shut it down. Carl Jung didn't write directly about numbness, but he would have called this a shadow effect, the psyche's way of protecting your conscious self by banishing certain emotions to the basement. But here's the twist. What you push away doesn't disappear. It just simmers, quietly. And when you grow up with a mother who made your feelings inconvenient, your system adapts. You stop crying, not because you're fine, but because no one came when you did. Eventually, numbness feels safer than hope, safer than sadness, safer than that little flicker of rage you've buried so deep it only comes out when you're alone and can't take another polite conversation. Here's something not many people know. During World War I, a condition known as shell shock became widely recognized. Soldiers weren't always visibly injured, but their bodies shut down. Emotionally, they'd go mute, numb, detached. Today we call it trauma response. Your childhood may not have been a battlefield in the traditional sense, but it was a place you couldn't safely feel. So now, as an adult, you freeze. You overthink instead of express. You zone out during deep conversations. You delay texts for days because responding requires energy you don't have. You're not lazy. You're not cold. You're protecting yourself. Experts still debate whether emotional numbness is primarily neurological or behavioral, but most agree it's reversible with time, with gentleness, with trust. So what do you do when you're numb? Here's the hard truth. You don't force feeling. You notice it. You name it. You stay. Start with this simple, strange question. What color is my numbness today? You might say gray or static white or that dull beige of a waiting room no one decorates. That's progress. That's awareness. Then, ask your body. Yes, your body, what it needs. Not your schedule, not your guilt. Your body, a nap, a scream into a pillow, A walk without music? A bath so long your fingers wrinkle? Let it choose. And don't expect the emotions to come rushing back in like a movie montage. Healing isn't cinematic. It's slow, uneven, often boring. But one day you'll cry at something small, an old photo, a song you forgot you loved, and you'll realize, I'm thawing. That's the goal. Not a dramatic outburst, not a perfect resolution with your mother. Just the quiet return of your own presence. Let me give you something to hold on to during this phase. You're allowed to be a slow, blooming thing. You don't have to feel everything all at once. You don't have to be better by the weekend. You just have to keep showing up for yourself in tiny ways. Here's a ritual to try. Every morning, ask yourself, what is one tiny thing I can feel today without judgment? It could be the warmth of a mug in your hands, the coolness of your sheets as you roll over, the smell of coffee or rain or your old hoodie. That's sensation. That's life. Start there. Because numbness is not the end. It's the bridge. It means your body trusts you enough to rest, to pause before it lets emotion back in, and as you wait, hold this truth gently. You're not broken. You're just healing in quiet. In our next section, we'll talk about something you might not realize is still driving your behavior. The constant need to prove yourself, to be perfect, to be better than her, and how that silent competition with your mother is costing you peace. Perfection is a prison with velvet walls. It looks impressive from the outside. Your clean apartment, your glowing performance reviews, your well-timed texts with emojis just cute enough to seem effortless. People say, you've got it all together. But inside, you're exhausted. You're afraid to miss a call, to forget a birthday, to let your guard down. Because somewhere deep down the voice still whispers, if you're not perfect, you won't be loved. Sound familiar? Carl Jung would say your inner child, the one who grew up craving a mother's approval, is still chasing it. Only now, you disguise it as ambition, excellence, hyper-independence. But really, you're still trying to prove something to her, even if she's no longer around, even if you never say it out loud. You want her to see you now, to say, wow, look at you. I was wrong. But that acknowledgement may never come, so you keep running, overachieving, people-pleasing. And here's the twist. The drive for perfection doesn't come from confidence. It comes from fear. Fear that if you stop doing, stop achieving, stop performing, the love will disappear. And here's where things get tricky. Perfectionism is often rewarded. Society applauds it. You get praised for being so organized and so dependable, so calm under pressure. But no one sees the panic attacks you have in silence. No one sees the way you replay every conversation to make sure you didn't sound annoying. And no one sees how much of this is rooted in her. Because when your mother only showed affection, when you did something right, got good grades, looked pretty, stayed quiet, you learned love was conditional. You became the gold star child, and now you're the gold star adult. But gold stars don't keep you warm at night. Let's dip into a little history. In ancient Rome, victorious generals were given parades called triumphs. But during the celebration, a slave would whisper in the general's ear, "Memento mori." Remember you are mortal. Why? To keep their ego in check. Because glory can be blinding. You need your own whisper, not to bring you down, but to bring you home. So here's your line. I don't have to earn rest. Say it again. I don't have to earn rest. Not with perfect behavior, not with endless to-do lists, not by becoming everything she wanted and more. You are enough. Even when you're average, even when you cancel plans, even when you let the dishes sit overnight and forget someone's birthday. You are enough. And here's a weird little-known fact. Researchers studying perfectionism have found it's linked more to parental criticism than actual expectations. In other words, it's not what was demanded of you. It's how you perceived you were treated when you made mistakes. So healing doesn't mean fixing your drive. It means getting curious. Why do I feel safer when I'm flawless? Who am I afraid of disappointing? And here comes the gut punch. What if that person already decided they wouldn't love me unconditionally? Then what? Then maybe you stop performing. Maybe you let yourself be average, be messy, be human. Maybe you post the selfie without retouching it 47 times. Maybe you send the email without rereading it 5 times. Maybe you forgive yourself for not being the daughter who changed her. And if you feel lost without that perfection armor, that's okay, because underneath it is the real you. Raw, real, radiant, not in spite of your flaws, but because of them. Try this journaling prompt. If I didn't have to prove anything, I would. Let it flow. No filters. No edits. You might surprise yourself, and next time that voice creeps in, you know the one, saying, you should have done more, or you didn't do it right, smile. Because you've seen behind the curtain, you know where it came from, and you're not playing that game anymore. In the next section, we're entering deeper waters. Let's talk about guilt. Not the kind that keeps you up once in a while, but the chronic, soul-level guilt that whispers, maybe I'm the bad one. And why it clings so tightly when your wounds come from the person who raised you. There's a certain kind of guilt that doesn't make sense on paper. You try to explain it and the words fall flat. Because technically, you didn't do anything wrong. You just set a boundary, took space, told the truth, and yet you feel like a terrible person. Welcome to the guilt that comes from breaking the rules of a family system that was never built to protect you. Let's go deeper. When your mother raised you to prioritize her comfort over your clarity, her mood over your truth, you learned a dangerous lesson, that love equals self-abandonment. So now, even the smallest acts of self-care can feel like betrayal. Saying no becomes a battle. Canceling a visit leaves you nauseated for days. Speaking honestly about your feelings, you might as well be planning a heist, and the worst part, you can't explain it to people who've never lived it. They'll say, but she's your mom. And you'll want to scream, because what they don't see is that being her child meant becoming her caretaker, her therapist, her emotional sponge, and you were never allowed to opt out. You had a job. Keep her happy, even if it killed you slowly. Let's bring in a historical sidebar. During the Middle Ages, there was a concept called filial piety, a code of honoring your parents no matter what. It was noble, yes, but it was also weaponized. Disobedience was sin. Boundaries were shameful, and some of that thinking still lives in our bones, especially if your mother wore martyrdom like a perfume. You know the type. She sacrificed everything for you. She never let you forget it. And any time you dared to express pain, she pulled out the ledger. After everything I've done. And so you learned to swallow your feelings whole. Because speaking them was framed as cruelty even. Now you worry about being unfair. You replay every decision like a courtroom drama. You write mental apology letters for things you haven't even done yet. But here's the wild, freeing truth. Guilt is not always a sign you've done something wrong. Sometimes, it's a sign you're doing something new. When you come from a system of enmeshment, guilt shows up the moment you choose individuality. It's a phantom alarm, a glitch in the code, because for years, good meant obedient. And now, you're trying to be free. That's going to hurt a little. Here's a strange fact. Neuroscientists have found that guilt activates the same brain centers as physical pain. Which means yes, that pit in your stomach, that tightness in your chest, it's real, but it's not a moral compass. It's a habit, and habits can be unlearned. Here's your mantra. I am allowed to disappoint people who expect me to betray myself. Read that again. It doesn't make you cold, or selfish, or heartless. It makes you honest, because you cannot heal what you continue to deny. And you cannot build a life if you're constantly pausing it to manage someone else's feelings. Try this grounding exercise when guilt hits. Pause and name it. This is guilt, not truth. Ask, who taught me that choosing myself was wrong? Repeat, my choices can be kind and still make people uncomfortable. You don't have to be cruel to be clear. And yes, your mother might guilt trip you. That's her pattern, not your problem. You don't have to attend every emotional circus you're invited to, and if part of you still says, but what if she's right? Good. That means you're thinking, not reacting. You're learning to hold two truths at once. She did her best and she hurt me. I love her and I need space. I feel guilty and I'm not doing anything wrong. That is emotional maturity. That is what she may never model for you, but that is what you are growing into. In the next section, we'll dive into a very specific, uncomfortable realization that sometimes your deepest insecurities aren't yours. They were planted by her and watered over years. We'll talk about what it means to hand those back and finally recognize what's actually yours to carry. You ever look in the mirror and hear a voice in your head say something cruel? Ugh, you look awful today. No one actually likes you. You're such a disappointment. And you flinch because you think it's you talking to yourself. But what if I told you it's not? What if that voice doesn't belong to you at all? What if it was planted there, word by word, glance by glance, silence by silence, by someone who was supposed to teach you love? Let's pull back the curtain. When you were little, your mind was like wet cement. Everything left a mark. And if your mother criticized your body, your thoughts, your decisions, even subtly, even jokingly, you absorbed it like truth. Not because it was true, but because she was the sun in your sky. If the sun says you're too much, too loud, too sensitive, who are you to argue? And so, you didn't. You agreed, you internalized it. And now that voice lives in your mind like an uninvited roommate who critiques your every move. You're not you. Crazy. You're not broken. You're echoing the past. Carl Jung called this introjection. The process of absorbing someone else's voice as your own internal dialogue. And guess what? It happens most often with parents, especially mothers. Especially critical ones. Let's take a breath. This isn't about blame. It's about origin. Because once you know that voice isn't actually yours, you can start to challenge it. Let's look at history for a second. In the 1600s, there was a legal tradition called the devil's advocate. A person whose job was to argue against someone's sainthood, just to test if the case held up. You need to become your own devil's advocate. When that voice says, "You'll never be good enough," you say, "According to whom?" When it hisses, "Everyone's judging you," you ask, "Is that fact or fear?" You're not fighting yourself. You're confronting an old narrative, one that doesn't belong to you. Here's a bizarre little psychological fact. Children are more likely to believe negative feedback than positive, because evolution trained us to prioritize survival. Criticism felt like a cue to adjust, to stay safe. But now those old cues are just outdated programming. Here's what you can do. Name the voice. Literally give it a name that isn't yours. Oh hey, that's mom critique mode showing up again. This helps you create emotional distance. Replace it with yours. Your actual voice, the one that says, "I'm doing okay. I'm learning. I don't need to be perfect to be lovable." Write a rebuttal. When that old script shows up, write a reply like you're defending a friend. Because you are. You're defending yourself. It might feel weird at first. Unnatural. Fake. But that's because the lies got practiced for years. The truth is just getting warmed up. You are not too much. You're not enough. You are a whole, complex, messy, magnificent human trying to untangle wires that were crossed before you even had language. And no, you're not imagining it. Studies show that children raised with high maternal criticism often develop insecure self-concepts, even if they succeed outwardly. So if your inner confidence feels like it's always on shaky ground, this is why. But here's the light in all of this. What was planted can be pulled. What was programmed can be rewritten. What was whispered can be drowned out by new truths. Try this affirmation every time the inner critic shows up. That voice is not mine. I choose what I believe now. Whisper it. Write it. Say it out loud until your body believes it more than your brain does. And then ask yourself this question, gently. If I had grown up in a home where I was celebrated instead of criticized, how would I speak to myself now? Let that version of you answer. They're still in there, quiet, waiting. In the next section, we're going to sit with something even more tender. What happens when you finally speak your truth and no one believes you? We'll talk about the gaslighting, the denial, the way your story gets erased, and how to reclaim it one brave sentence at a time. There's a specific kind of heartbreak that comes not just from pain, but from not being believed about your pain. You finally gather the courage to speak your truth, maybe to a sibling, a friend, even your mom herself, and the response? A shrug, a smirk, a wave of the hand, or worse, that never happened. And just like that, reality goes slippery. You start second-guessing your memories, questioning your sanity, wondering if you made it all up. You didn't. What you're experiencing is called gaslighting. And when it comes from the people who raised you, it doesn't just distort your perception, It shatters your compass. You learned not just to survive dysfunction, but to doubt your own experience of it, and the damage runs deep. Let's take a historical detour. The term gaslighting comes from a 1944 film, where a husband manipulates his wife into thinking she's losing her mind by dimming the gas lights and insisting they're just as bright. Over time, she stops trusting her own eyes. Sound familiar? That's what it's like growing up in a home where your version of reality is always too sensitive, too dramatic, or flat out wrong. So when you say, "She used to scream at me," they say, "She was just stressed." When you say, "She never protected me," they say, "She did her best." When you say, "That hurt," they say, "You're imagining things," and then you start to wonder, am I the villain here? But let's get one thing straight. Memory isn't about exact playback. It's about emotional truth. You might not remember the exact words, but your nervous system remembers how it felt. Unsafe, unseen, unheard. That's real. That matters. And no one gets to erase it. There's a reason survivors of emotional abuse often describe their healing like putting together a puzzle where half the pieces were hidden on purpose. You don't just have to remember, you have to believe yourself again. So here's your anchor. If it hurt me, it matters, even if no one else agrees. You are not required to convince anyone of your story for it to be valid. Let's take this a step deeper. People who gaslight often aren't just protecting themselves from the truth, they're protecting a narrative. One where they're the victim, the hero, the martyr. Your truth? It threatens that story, so they deny it. Not because it didn't happen, but because accepting it would force them to change. And some people will twist the facts to stay comfortable. Let them. Because your healing doesn't need their permission. Here's a wild little known fact. In trauma therapy, it's common for memories to surface not all at once, but in layers, like film developing in slow motion. So if you're still remembering things years later, or only just now finding words, you're not broken. You're thawing. And thawing takes time. Here's a practice for those moments when doubt creeps in. Close your eyes. Picture your younger self in that moment of pain. Ask, what did they need to hear that no one said? Say it to them, out loud or in writing. Then say it to you. It's not silly. It's sacred. It's how you start becoming your own witness, because maybe no one protected you then, but you can protect you now. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe your mother a revised version of events that flatters her memory. You owe yourself the truth. Say this with me. I am allowed to speak, even if it makes others uncomfortable. I am allowed to remember, even if no one else does. I am allowed to heal, even if no one apologizes. And when someone tries to make you feel like the villain for simply telling the truth, smile. That means you're getting close. In the final section, we'll land the plane gently into a place of radical self-compassion. We'll talk about how healing doesn't mean becoming a perfect version of yourself. It means finally feeling safe in your own skin. No more running. No more performing. Just rest. So you made it. And I know that doesn't sound like much. But it is. Because there were moments when you didn't think you'd survive this healing journey. When everything inside you wanted To give up, give in, go numb, but you didn't. You kept showing up for yourself, one breath at a time. And tonight, we land here, not in triumph, not in some Hollywood-style breakthrough moment, but in something quieter, something real, peace. Not the kind that's always soft and smiling, the kind that holds your hand when you're crying on the bathroom floor at 2 a.m., whispering, "You're still worthy, even now." You see, healing from a mother wound isn't about getting over it. It's about growing around it, like a tree around barbed wire. You'll never be the person you might have been in a safer home. But you are becoming someone just as strong, maybe even stronger. And no, not because of the pain, but because of what you did with it. You alchemized it. You turned it into wisdom. You're learning how to live without betraying yourself. That's rare. That's holy. Let's bring in one final piece of history. In Japanese art, there's a tradition called kintsugi, the practice of repairing broken pottery with gold. Not to hide the cracks, but to honor them. To say, this piece was broken, and it's more beautiful now. You are kintsugi. Every scar is a seam of light. Every bruise is a map back to yourself. And here's a quiet truth most people won't tell you. You don't have to forgive her to be free. You don't have to reconcile to find peace. You don't even have to understand why she did what she did. You just have to stop making her voice louder than your own. Because your life isn't a reaction to her anymore. It's yours, your mornings, your choices, your laughter, loud and unbothered. Your boundaries, firm and unapologetic. You don't need anyone's permission to take up space. You never did. And if some days the grief still hits you like a wave, that's okay. You don't have to be over it. You're not a self-improvement project. You're a living, breathing, evolving soul, learning to trust again, starting with yourself. If you're still wondering what healing actually feels like, maybe it's this: waking up without dread, saying no without panic, caring for yourself like someone you actually love, even when your inner critic whispers, even when the guilt creeps in, even when no one claps for you, you still show up, not to prove anything, but because you're done abandoning yourself. That's the moment you stop performing survival and start living. Now, as we ease out of this journey together, take one last breath. Inhale. I'm safe now. Exhale. I'm free to rest. And remember, you are not alone in this. There are millions of us, learning how to mother ourselves in the ways we always needed. Lighting candles in the dark for each other. Rewriting the script. You don't have to. Carry it all tonight. Let the lights go dim. Let your muscles loosen. Let your mind finally soften. You made it, love, and I'm proud of you.